In the history of the British royal family, few figures have endured as turbulent a journey as Camilla Rosemary Shand, later Camilla Parker Bowles, and ultimately Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. From the earliest days when the public knew her as the third person in the stormy marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, she became the focus of relentless criticism. The press of the time painted Camilla as a persistent shadow, tied to scandal, betrayal, and the heartbreak of the royal household. And yet, over the years, that image began to change. In 2000, after years of turbulence and patient waiting, Charles and Camilla were married. It was a watershed moment not only for them but for the monarchy itself. Camilla, now the Duchess of Cornwall, slowly integrated into public life, projecting the image of a restrained, dutiful woman, standing by her husband in every engagement. Years later, when Charles ascended the throne, she officially became Queen Consort, seen as part of the monarchy's continuity and stability. Public acceptance of her never absolute grew significantly, a result of patience, deftness, and carefully managed public relations. And then, one summer afternoon at Highgrove House, everything Camilla had built over nearly 2 decades was suddenly shaken, all because of a single photograph. According to media reports, the photograph was taken surreptitiously from a great distance, through the lush green trees of Highgrove's private gardens, using a telephoto lens. In the frame, Camilla is smiling an easy, perhaps even slightly intimate smile as she converses with Rupert, a celebrated garden designer who had been invited to redesign the estate's grounds. They stand close, leaning towards one another as if to hear more clearly. Sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting a glow on her face, creating a scene at once serene and suggestive. Within hours of appearing online, the image had splashed across the front pages of the tabloid press and spread with dizzying speed. Provocative headlines, barbed commentary, and endless body language analyses filled the air. A single question began echoing everywhere. Was this betrayal or merely a moment misunderstood? It was, on the surface, a simple question, but in the current climate, it carried a particular weight. Charles, now king, was battling an illness that had visibly diminished his strength. Each public appearance revealed a slighter frame, a deeper fatigue, stirring genuine concern among the people. In such circumstances, any gesture by his spouse, even the most harmless of friendly intimacies, could be scrutinized through a far harsher lens. Why could a photograph, with no definitive proof of wrongdoing, be enough to shake the very foundations of the monarchy? The answer lies in this: the royal family does not live by law alone, it lives by public trust. Image and symbolism are their most precious capital. A touch of the hand, a smile, a glance, when placed in the wrong context, can become a dagger to the heart of royal honor. And in a reign already under the shadow of the king's fragile health, any perceived crack, whether real or imagined, can erupt into a storm. That storm had begun. And this time, it carried with it warning bells of a crisis that was not merely about a photograph, but about trust, loyalty, and the legacy of an entire dynasty. Just hours after the Highgrove photograph surfaced online, the British press and soon the world seemed to ignite. The tabloids, long accustomed to mining every breath of royal life, had found a true goldmine. The Mirror ran a bold front-page headline, "Who's keeping the Queen Company?" at Highgrove, a question vague enough to avoid a lawsuit, yet tantalizing enough to be irresistible. The Daily Mail chose a more emotive route, publishing a series of tightly cropped shots paired with captions hinting at intimate gestures between Camilla and Rupert. On social media, things spread faster than any television bulletin ever could. The hashtag #CamillaAffair shot to the top of the national trending list within a single evening. In less than 24 hours, it had been used over 1 million times, accompanied by countless memes, video breakdowns of Camilla's body language, and even sprawling investigations into Rupert, covering everything from his family background and past garden design projects to his current marital status. The hashtag royal scandal soon followed, quickly adopted by international media as a neat, memorable label for the entire saga, one that could draw readers from New York to Sydney. Public reaction split into two clear camps. On one side were those who expressed deep sympathy for King Charles. They saw an image of a man in his 70s, fighting illness, and felt that this incident, whatever the truth was, a cruel blow at his most vulnerable moment. Royal forums filled with supportive comments. He's waited his whole life to become king. And now this, or illness, is enough of a burden. Now he has to deal with doubts about his marriage too. But on the other side, many were quick to turn their fire on Camilla. For them, the incident reopened wounds that had never fully healed from the 1990s. When Diana famously told the BBC, "There were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." To these critics, the Highgrove photograph felt like history repeating itself, only this time, Camilla was on the receiving end of suspicion. No matter who Rupert Elling was or what had actually transpired, the image alone was enough to spark associations of betrayal, secrecy, and tragedy. What made the situation even more charged was Buckingham Palace's decision to say nothing. A royal spokesperson issued a brief statement: "We do not comment on personal rumors," intended, perhaps, to dampen speculation. It instead poured fuel on the fire. In the age of instant information, silence is rarely interpreted as "there's nothing to say" more often. It reads as "there's something to hide." That silence became fertile ground for speculation. Royal commentators filled the airwaves, dissecting every possible scenario. Was this a sign of cracks in the Charles-Camilla marriage? Was the palace trying to protect its dignity by keeping secrets? Or was it all just a tabloid storm in a teacup? The longer the questions went unanswered, the more public trust wavered. Even loyal royal watchers began to ask, if they're not being honest about this, what else might they be hiding? The press quickly seized the information vacuum to revisit the past. Newspapers and TV channels replayed old interviews with Diana, especially the moments where she spoke of loneliness, breakdown, and betrayal. Footage of a young Diana, her eyes brimming with sadness, was cut alongside the Highgrove photograph of Camilla, creating a visual comparison as brutal as it was effective. Though the circumstances were different, the public had no trouble drawing a straight line between the two stories, from Diana's tragedy to Camilla's controversy, as if history were looping back in a new guise. For many, Diana's memory is not just the story of an unhappy princess, but a symbol of fragility under the relentless pressures of monarchy. This latest scandal didn't just place Camilla under a harsher spotlight, it risked dragging the royal family back into the shadows of the 1990s, a period they had struggled to recover from after wave upon wave of scandal. By now, social media was no longer just a platform for sharing news, it had become a public courtroom. Every comment, every tweet, every video analysis spread like evidence in an unofficial trial. And in this court, the royal family had no control. One Twitter user wrote, "We forgave her because we thought Charles had found happiness." But if this is true, what does he have left? Lines like that, shared tens of thousands of times, gathered into an irresistible tide of feeling. In the wider picture, Rupert Elling, the man unwittingly caught in the center, was swept into the media storm. Once known in specialist circles as a celebrated garden designer, he was now the mystery man at Highgrove. Photographers camped outside his home. Neighbors were quizzed about the true nature of his relationship with the queen consort. The less the palace said, the more tantalizing the side stories became. But the deepest impact of the affair lay not with Rupert, nor entirely with Camilla, but in the way it shook one of the monarchy's most vital pillars: trust. When a national symbol relies on its image to maintain stability, even the smallest crack can become a dangerous fracture. And this time, the fracture appeared just as the new king was in one of his most fragile moments of health, prompting the inevitable question, could the royal family survive yet another storm? Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, tourists still posed for photographs. The changing of the guard went on as scheduled, and the Union flag flew high. But inside, the atmosphere was different. That heavy silence, both within the palace walls and in the hearts of those who once trusted without question, seemed likely to linger, until a clear answer emerged, if it ever did. As the tide of speculation swelled, the name Rupert Elling quickly became one of the most searched on the internet. Previously known only in circles of landscape art enthusiasts and garden design collectors, he was now recognized by millions through a single candid photograph and a handful of sensational headlines. Rupert, 57, was celebrated in his field as a master of blending classical elegance with a freer, contemporary sensibility. He had designed gardens for many aristocratic estates and was particularly committed to conservation projects, a cause to which Camilla had long devoted much of her energy. Their association was nothing new. Public records show that Rupert and Camilla first worked together in 2008 on a project to revitalize a community garden in Wiltshire, funded by a charity under her patronage. Since then, they had collaborated regularly on fundraising events and landscape restorations, including the revival of a historic garden at Highgrove House. Those who had seen them together often described them as a perfect aesthetic pairing, one offering the vision, the other realizing it through careful placement of every color and flower bed. A former Highgrove staff member, speaking anonymously, described the relationship with a mix of admiration and unease. She trusted him in an unusual way. When Charles was tied up, or when her royal schedule meant endless official engagements, Rupert was the one she'd seek out for a chat. And it wasn't just about plants. They'd talk about everything from French Impressionist paintings to her childhood memories in rural Sussex. With the relentless pressure of royal life, I think she found in him something almost no one inside the palace could give her peace without judgment. It was precisely this peace that the press seized upon when the Highgrove photographs surfaced. Newspapers combed through every trace of interaction between Camilla and Rupert, however trivial, and pieced them into a timeline heavy with insinuation. Three moments, in particular, became recurring fixtures in media coverage, held up as supposed clues to a connection that might have crossed the line from friendship. The first moment, autumn 2011 in the city of Bath. A passerby happened to photograph Camilla dining with Rupert at a small Italian restaurant. The intrigue lay not in the fact that they were having dinner, hardly unusual in a professional relationship, but in the absence of royal protection officers. In a world where every royal movement is meticulously choreographed, the sight of the then Duchess of Cornwall seated in a cozy, candlelit setting with a single companion seemed unusual enough to spark curiosity. The second moment, a video call from 2014 leaked from an unknown source. In it, Camilla smiles as Rupert shows her a newly planted flower in his trial garden. At one point, she calls him her green soul, a phrase both vividly poetic and faintly intimate. That snippet was clipped, shared across social media, and soon became a secondary hashtag, #GreenSoul, often paired with #CamillaAffair. The third moment, a large oil painting titled June Evening Garden, which Rupert gave to Camilla for her birthday in 2017. The work depicts a summer garden bathed in golden dusk, with a single wooden bench nestled among a sea of lavender. Art critics described the painting as deeply personal and unmistakably marked by the nature of their bond. The palace had once displayed it publicly in a charity exhibition, but now the media dissected it as a supposed emblem of some unspoken affection. What's striking is that, while all three of these moments were real and publicly recorded, there is no concrete evidence that the relationship between Camilla and Rupert ever crossed the line beyond close friendship. Yet, in an age when images and words can be bent to fit a narrative, the truth is often the first casualty. Body language experts, the kind who surface on television whenever a story like this breaks, were brought in to dissect every gesture in the Highgrove photograph, as well as past public appearances. One claimed her gaze lingered longer than necessary when looking at Rupert. Another noted her open, forward-leaning posture as a sign of comfort and trust. But others pushed back, saying it was simply Camilla's natural communication style. She's known for being warm and open. The problem, as many commentators observed, was never really about evidence, or the lack of it, but about the story the public was already inclined to believe. When the image of someone as controversial as Camilla surfaces in an ambiguous context, collective memory instantly summons her past, from her role in the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage to her slow, hard-won journey toward public acceptance. Years of careful image rehabilitation were suddenly at risk, all because of one candid photograph. Seen in a purely personal light, Camilla's closeness with Rupert might be entirely innocent, a woman finding solace in a friend who shares her passions, in a life otherwise wrapped in protocol and pressure. But in the public eye, especially at a moment when Charles is visibly weakened by illness, every action is examined under the harsh microscope of emotion and prejudice. A veteran BBC journalist put it plainly: if Camilla were a completely new figure, untainted by past controversy, that photograph would never have turned into a storm. But she's not new. She's part of a bigger story, one the public has never truly closed the book on. And that is what made everything so combustible. Rupert Elling, once a longtime friend and trusted collaborator, was recast in the collective imagination as the third person. Camilla, a queen consort who had finally been embraced by much of the public, now faced the risk of losing that fragile trust. In the royal family, a famously guarded institution, careful never to show its cracks, was forced to confront the question: could the truth, now whatever it was, salvage their image when the public had already chosen to believe another version of events? The media storm howled outside, but within the ancient walls of Buckingham Palace, another storm, quieter, more private, and far crueler, was gathering. Charles, already struggling with fragile health, did not learn of the Highgrove photograph from a press secretary's briefing, but from the front page of the Mirror, where it was splashed beside the headline, "The Mystery Man Beside the Queen." According to a close source, his first reaction was not an outburst of fury, but a frozen stillness. He sat there, the source recalled, holding the paper, staring at the picture as if trying to find one detail that would prove it was fake. But there was no such detail. Camilla's eyes, her half-concealed smile, her hand resting lightly on the chair beside Rupert. It was all there, undeniable. When Charles and Camilla finally faced each other in private, the air was so heavy that even footsteps in the corridor seemed to echo like gunshots. Charles spoke first, his voice roughened not just by illness. "You've humiliated me before the entire world." Camilla flinched, but quickly steadied herself. "Rupert is just a friend, Charles," she said, keeping her voice soft. "He's been there for me since before we married, in times when I couldn't share my thoughts with anyone else. There is nothing like what they're saying." But Charles wasn't easily soothed. He flung the newspaper onto the table, its crumpled front page looking as if it had survived a battle. "You know what people will think. You know it all too well. And now, when I'm weakening, when the whole world is watching to see if we can hold steady, you hand them this." In that moment, old wounds, long thought to be healed, began to bleed again. Charles, a man who had spent decades living under Diana's shadow, couldn't help but hear the echo of the past in all this. The public had forgiven him, at least in part, when they saw him and Camilla weather years of mockery together. But now, one photograph and a few sensational headlines had resurrected Diana's most haunting line: "There were 3 of us in this marriage." Camilla, sensing that comparison in his gaze, bit her lip. "You think I've betrayed you for everything I've endured to be with you. The years of being called every vile name in the book. The times I had to step back, stay silent, so you could fulfill your duty. You know I chose you over a much easier life." But her defense only thickened the tension in the room. Charles rose, moving toward the window, where the paparazzi's flashbulbs lit the night in cold bursts. "Perhaps you've been by my side," he said slowly, but this image will be with me forever. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of words. It was a gulf between two people who had once stood united against the world's scorn. Both understood that in the royal family's realm, perception can matter as much as truth. And right now, perception was their enemy. Out in the corridors, palace staff moved with an unusual, almost exaggerated caution. A long-serving butler later remarked he had never felt the atmosphere so heavy, as if the air itself weighed a ton. Footmen whispered in the kitchens. Press aides avoided each other's Wi-Fis, and senior advisors huddled in closed-door meetings, working through contingency plans in case events spun completely out of control. Everyone knew things were bad, one security officer recalled, but what worried us most was the silence between them. That silence stretched into the evenings, when the two of them dined in the same room but at opposite ends of the table, exchanging only the barest of courtesies. Gone were the faint, shared chuckles about gardens or charitable projects. In their place came the sterile clink of cutlery. For those who witnessed it, the message was unmistakable. The cracks in their marriage were no longer just the stuff of rumor. Royal commentators began to speculate openly, was this the first stage of a full-blown crisis, or would it all settle down, as so many palace storms had in the past? But as some pointed it out, the difference this time was timing. Charles was weakening both in health and in political standing. A marital scandal now would not simply be a personal blow. It could shake public confidence in an institution already straining to project unity and modern relevance. The irony was that both Charles and Camilla knew how to handle a public crisis. They had done it many times before. But when the crisis is lodged in your own bedroom, diplomacy and camera-ready poise are useless. A former advisor from Queen Elizabeth II's reign put it bluntly in an interview with The Times: when trust is in question, every explanation sounds like an excuse. In this palace, the emotional distance between two people matters far more than any press statement. And that distance, according to those close to the situation, was widening by the day. In the days following the fierce confrontation between Charles and Camilla, the atmosphere inside the palace seemed stretched taut, ready to split with the slightest touch. Servants moved more quietly than usual, as though afraid that a slammed door or a dropped tray might trigger the king's temper or release tears the queen consort was holding back. Charles, though he kept to his schedule, carried a face marked by fatigue and bitterness. Camilla, for her part, shut herself away in her private rooms, avoiding prying eyes and the whispers along the corridors. But the silence didn't ease the scandal, it only fed the rumors. And then, on a leaden afternoon, as dusk crept over Buckingham's domes, came a dry, deliberate knock at her door. The door to Camilla's private quarters was ajar, spilling a narrow shaft of light into the dim hallway. The knock came 3 times firm, measured, unhurried. Before Camilla could answer, the door swung open and in stepped Princess Anne, in a dark dress, her hair pinned into a severe knot, her gaze as sharp as a blade. No pleasantries, no smile, only the solid thud of the door closing behind her, cutting the room off from the rest of the palace. "We need to talk," Anne said, her voice low but hard as steel. "About my brother, and about you." Camilla, seated at her writing desk, froze. Before her lay a stack of unanswered letters and a few newspapers turned face down, as if avoiding their accusatory headlines might make them vanish. "Anne, I don't know what you've heard, but no need to explain." Anne cut in, her eyes locked on Camilla. "I've heard enough, and I've seen the photograph. But this isn't just about that picture. Camilla, this is about legacy. My mother's legacy, Queen Elizabeth II's, and the respect it deserves." Each word fell like a hammer, heavy and precise. Anne stepped closer, closing the space between them to no more than the breadth of a small table. "Do you have any idea what my brother is going through? He's given his entire life to duty. And now, with his health failing, he needs absolute support. Instead, what does the public see the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom sharing a private laugh with another man at Highgrove, of all places. The home meant to symbolize the family's bond with this country. Camilla felt heat rise to her cheeks. Rupert is just a friend. An old friend. I've said that 100 times. Anne didn't let her finish. A friend, do you think the public will believe that we're after everything they've seen in the past? Or have you forgotten we lost Diana because trust was shattered? Her voice dipped, still sharp but almost deadly quiet. I stood there, Camilla, on the day of her funeral. I saw the whole world weep, and I swore to myself I would never, never allow this monarchy to take a blow like that again. The air in the room seemed to thicken, heavy as the stone walls outside. Camilla fought to keep her composure, but the past came rushing back, public scorn in strangers' eyes, mocking placards branding her a homewrecker, and years of living in history's shadow, forever compared, forever scrutinized. You think I don't know what I've been called, Camilla shot back, her voice beginning to tremble. I endured decades just to be with Charles, to stand beside him in duty. I was there when the whole world turned against us. I sacrificed my private life, my peace, even my dignity, only to now be branded a traitor over one candid photograph. But Anne did not flinch. Her eyes, still as sharp as a blade, held the cold resolve of someone long accustomed to placing duty above personal feeling. Camilla, your responsibility now is not to defend yourself, it's to protect the monarchy. Every action you take, every glance, every touch can be magnified and interpreted. You know that. And you must stop giving people reason to doubt you. Anne's voice didn't need to rise. Each word landed like a command. It was the voice of someone who didn't need a formal title to compel obedience. Camilla turned away, staring out the window where the dark silhouette of Buckingham's Gardens stretched beneath the dim glow of the street lamps. Inside her chest, a knot of hurt and humiliation tightened. Anne could never truly understand her loneliness, the feeling of always being the outsider, of forever having to prove herself, even after wearing the title Queen Consort. But Anne had no intention of softening her words. I love Charles, and I will protect him at any cost, she said, her voice now almost a whisper, yet carrying a weight that could not be ignored. If you truly love him, then put the monarchy and him above every other personal attachment. This is no longer just your story, Camilla. This is the story of an entire nation. With that, Anne turned and walked out, leaving Camilla alone in the stillness of the room. The soft click of the closing door lingered, like the smoke after a gunshot. Camilla sank into her chair, hands clasped tightly together. She knew Anne wasn't wrong, at least, not about the consequences, but she also knew that no matter what she did, there would always be those who saw her through the lens of the past. And perhaps Anne was one of them. Within the palace, word of their conversation spread quickly, not through official channels, but via whispered fragments traded among staff. Everyone understood that if Princess Anne had intervened, the situation was far graver than the public realized. And so the pressure on Camilla, already taut as a drawn bow, tightened yet another notch. By nightfall, Buckingham lay under a cloak of shadow. In his study, Charles sat alone, the warm amber light of his desk lamp spilling across pristine sheets of paper. His hand shook slightly as he gripped his fountain pen, words spilling out in uneven lines, not for public eyes, but to release the weight pressing on his chest. In his diary, he wrote of the pain of betrayal, not merely from an action or a photograph, but from the feeling of being abandoned in his most fragile moment. He compared his present torment to what Diana had endured, and realized with a bitterness hard to swallow, that history seemed to be mocking him by repeating itself, only this time he was standing on the other side of the hurt. Outside, rain began tapping against the window. In that sound, Charles reached a decision he had never imagined making. He would ask Camilla to leave the palace. Not a public divorce, he knew too well that such a spectacle would hurl the monarchy into an uncontrollable storm. Instead, he chose Ray Millhouse, a secluded and discreet estate, as a quiet exile, a distance far enough to cool the scandal, but close enough to send the unmistakable message that between them now stood a wall that could not be torn down. The order went out through his private secretary, carrying only the terse instruction, Her Majesty will depart tomorrow. But when Camilla received it, she could not accept it. That evening, wrapped in a thin shawl, she walked briskly down the long, cold corridors, pleading for one last meeting with Charles. She knocked on his door once, twice, 3 times. No reply. A 4th time, still silence. No door opened, no voice came back. Only the steady, remote rhythm of the rain, like the heartbeat of something long frozen. The next morning, London lay under a dull gray sky. A side gate of the palace swung open and Camilla stepped out, clutching her damp shawl around her shoulders, her face pale from the chill. There was no formal farewell, no ceremonial fanfare, no lines of guards, just a handful of black umbrellas held at a polite distance, and one solitary figure slipping into the back of a black car. But beyond the iron railings, the world was anything but silent. The media storm erupted with headlines screaming, "Queen leaves palace secret separation at Buckingham monarchy in the eye of the storm." Cameras tracked the convoy, flashes slicing the air as if to tear apart every last second she remained in the place once called home. Inside the palace, everything fell into a cold, hollow quiet. Charles did not appear in public, and no official statement was issued. But everyone knew a defining chapter of the reign had closed in silence, while the pain, once again, became the royal family's most closely guarded secret.